With Regulation G knocking on the door and Regulation F being virtually gone, I've been testing the most popular cores that some have been calling the best for Regulation G. Things like Calyrex Shadow, Kyogre, Zamazenta, and the new up-and-coming Legends Koraidon and Miraidon. Restricteds have always felt like a joke to me. As a competitive player, I've always found it more fun and interesting when we have a smaller pool of Pokemon to play with, which is why my favorite times for VGC are at the beginnings of a new generation. The Pokemon base stat total is much lower, and we have to get more creative with our movesets, our team building, and in my opinion, more things become viable during this time than at any other time throughout the VGC seasons. Something happened this generation that got me thinking, how did players handle these powerful threats back in the day? Obviously, it's always good to go back and see what players from the past did to win some of the biggest tournaments ever. So I did just that. And you know what? I think this might be the first time that a restricted Pokemon format feels fair? Today, I wanted to go over the history of restricted Pokemon in VGC, and why some players dread the return of things like Kyogre, Xerneas, Calyrex Shadow, and the like, how we use them, what they do, why they feel so oppressive, and why I think the way that TPCI is handling them this generation might be the best it has ever been. Before we get into all that, if you could take a minute to like the video and subscribe to the channel, it would mean the world to me. As the channel grows, so does the quality of my content. I'm a one-man crew here, and making these videos is an act of love from me to the community that I belong to. From the bottom of my heart, thank you. Also, if you enjoy VGC and want to get to know some of the best performing players in the scene, check out the newest addition to Pox VGC Media, the Fake Out Podcast. We interviewed Caster VGC and talked about his top 16 finish at EUIC, his personal philosophy when it comes to competing and team building, and the art of thinking big. A link to that is on the screen now and in the description. Now, onto the video. Ray Rizzo took the world by storm and would begin his conquest in 2010. This was the first year that restricted Pokemon as we know them were allowed in any official capacity. The rules were unlike anything we have ever seen since. Instead of what we do now, where you have 1 to 2 restricted Pokemon per team, you were allowed up to 2 restricted Pokemon per battle. This meant that Ray could pilot a team with 3 restricted legendary Pokemon, Kyogre, Groudon, and Dialga, to win the 2010 VGC World Championships. Take a look at just how wild the teams were in this top 8. Personally, I can't imagine a VGC format quite like this one ever happening again. 2 restricteds per battle, with probably as many as you wanted on the team itself, seems insane. Obviously, you can't just slap 6 legendary Pokemon on a team and call it a day. You need your supports. And with Ludicolo for the rain mode, the Guts Hariyama for trick room sweeping and enabling, and the ever-present Cresselia, helping handing and boosting the sweeping potential through the roof, Ray would take his team to win the 2010 VGC World Championships. This would be the first and only time that restricteds were legal for the next 6 years. And honestly, I could see how TPCI would feel tepid about making these powerful Pokemon legal again. How could you balance them? These are some of the strongest Pokemon in the game, where the average base stat total for a restricted is around the 680 mark, with some going as high as 700, like Huron White and Terapagos. Restricteds have always been the strongest Pokemon in the game, and Game Freak wouldn't just make them even more ridiculously strong and powerful, right? The next time we see restricted Pokemon return was in 2016, when Wolf Glick would finally get his World's win and his real shot at Pokemon stardom. This was the year of Primals and Megas, and battling against that kind of threat was oppressive to say the least. While every restricted Pokemon was allowed, the only ones that were truly viable were Kyogre, Groudon, and Rayquaza, as they would have the ability to Mega Evolve or go Primal, while other restricteds didn't. How could you choose anything else? The only other restricted that came even close was Xerneas, with its broken Geomancy shenanigans that almost tore the entire game apart. Competing during these years was intense, as it was the first time we would ever see base stat totals in the 700s, and it was such a careful metagame where if you lost a Pokemon, it was almost guaranteed over. Mistakes would be punished by a +2 Mega Rayquaza Extreme Speed to send the aforementioned victim into the stratosphere. A powerful format that felt as epic as Oros made them out to be, ripping the foundation of the metagame to shreds. 2019 was the next time that the restricted format would be at the World Championships. This year, however, was more of the same, as the continuation of the Mega Evolution and Primal forms of Kyogre and Groudon into Generation 7 made this probably the most powerful metagame of all time. Just take a look at the Pokemon that top-cutted the World Championships this year. Mons like Primal Groudon, Primal Kyogre, Mega Rayquaza, Xerneas all had to be checked by things like Stakataka, Tapu Fini, and Lunala on Naoto Mizubuchi's team, which allowed him to take it all the way and secure his world's victory. I commend the brainpower of the players from back in this time, as having to keep track of terrain, extreme weather, Mega Evolution ability and stat changes, Beast Boost from the Ultra Beast, speed control, and fairy dark auras all at the same time makes my brain hurt. 2022 would see the biggest power creep jump we had seen since Oras. Pokemon would return to their original forms due to the absence of Mega Evolution, and the playing field was instead dominated by Pokemon locked away in a DLC. It's almost pay to win. Obviously, it's a little more complicated than that, but to lock Pokemon away through a paid DLC was not something I had ever thought would come to Pokemon. But I suppose it makes sense in the age of subscription services for everything. Not since the likes of Xerneas had we seen a new restricted Pokemon feel so oppressive that it was either play or counter. Zacian getting arguably the best typing in the game, a crazy ability, a format warping move in Behemoth Blade, and pairing it next to Calyrex Shadow, who also had some of the best offensive moves, stats, and quite literally 2 abilities. Unnerve, that basically made opposing Pokemon unable to use their healing berries, thus making all of the opposing Pokemon 25 to 50% less bulky, and Grim Neigh, which boosted its special attack stat every time it gets a KO, which is very likely with how powerful Astral Barrage is, a signature 120 base power ghost type spread move. Oh, and did I mention the thing's base 150 special attack stat? Quite an absurd Pokemon, and something we hadn't seen since the likes of Xerneas. Dynamax would not be enough to stop these 2 threats when Eduardo Cunha took the World Championships in 2022. Restricted Pokemon continued to feel as unfun as they had ever been. So where does that leave us now, going into Regulation G and the upcoming World Championships in 2024? At the time of making this video, Regulation G has shown itself to be quite fun actually, which is not something I would have ever said about a restricted format before. But why is that? Why is it that this generation feels so different from the previous generations when the majority of players seem to drop off and get annoyed when restricted Pokemon are allowed in VGC? Check out this tweet from 45 Mice I saw on Twitter about this exact topic where he says, Terapagos is the most balanced legendary Game Freak has released since Gen 4? It's strong but has clear strengths and weaknesses. It's bulky but slowish. It doesn't really do damage turn 1, so it's crit bait when setting up. Its ability is strong but fair, requiring skill to use. This tweet came out as I was writing this script, and honestly, I have to agree. I kind of have to give credit where credit is due this generation. TPCI and Game Freak have done a pretty good job balancing Generation 9, and their single restricted format as it stands now actually doesn't feel too bad. With how many dark and normal types were introduced in Generation 9, things like Blood Moon Ursaluna or Chien-Pao, Calyrex Shadow actually seems like it's not that big of a problem. They nerfed Zacian's attack stat, and the ability only works once per battle. And with Terastallization, the ability to change your type into a normal type or even a grass type to resist things like Water Spout from Kyogre or Precipice Blades from Groudon, the game has pivoted so hard away from the power creep that it actually feels fun. Hell, people are even talking about how Kyogre has fallen off. An insane thing to say, when Kyogre has been at the top of the threat list for decades. Even the new restricteds in Generation 9 such as Terapagos, Miraidon, and Koraidon don't seem to be so centralizing and threatening to feel oppressive. Strong, yes, and consistent, but that's what a good Pokemon should be. Restricted formats had always felt like a different kind of game, a protect the queen type of format where if you kept your restricted Pokemon alive the longest, you're likely to win the game. Typings mattered a lot more before everything could change its type. Now, suddenly we don't get immediately drowned by a rain boosted Water Spout turn 1 every game. There is something else of note, and that is that Game Freak and TPCI have intentionally left out some of the most broken threats in the game. The abomination that is Xerneas with its broken setup move Geomancy has been an oppressive threat since its inception that never felt fair, especially when paired up with its Fairy Aura, boosting its already powerful fairy moves to unseen heights. But could you imagine those numbers with its Terra Fairy boosting them even higher? The intentional exclusion of both Yveltal and Xerneas allow for other restricted Pokemon to breathe and build around. The exclusion of Tapus and Ultra Beast is also something of note, as things like Stakataka or Kartana are not around to be monsters under Terastallization. The absence of any sort of restricted form change outside of Terapagos is also new. No Mega Rayquaza, no Mega Kyogre or Groudon. Things seem balanced at the moment, as all things should be. And for the first time in my entire time of playing VGC, I feel excited about playing with restricted Pokemon. Things may change, as Game Freak and TPCI may add more Pokemon through Pokemon Home. The absence of Tapus, for instance, feels very suspicious to me, but that's a topic for a different video. For now, I'm going to look forward to Regulation G and the potential double restricted format of Regulation H. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments if you are as excited about restricted Pokemon this year as I am. Stay tuned for more videos from PoxVGC. Until next time.